Today, we look back at a story that began long before the spotlight, before the speeches that stirred nations or the headlines that mark history. It is the story of a boy who searched for belonging, a man who sought purpose, and a leader who carried the weight of hope through turbulent times. From the shores of Hawaii to the streets of Chicago, from classrooms and courtrooms to the highest office in the land, his journey became more than a biography. It became a mirror of America's own struggle to define itself. It is a story of ideals tested, of faith renewed, of the quiet strength found in persistence and grace. It reminds us that leadership is not born of certainty but of courage, and that progress, however slow, is still progress worth fighting for. So as we trace the path of Barack Obama, his beginnings, his rise, his legacy, we do so not as spectators, but as witnesses to the enduring power of hope and the unending work of change. Barack Hussein Obama, too, was born on August 4th, 1961, in Honolulu, Hawaii, a child of two worlds, carrying both the rhythm of the Pacific and the cadence of Africa in his blood. His mother, in Dunham, was a Kansas-born anthropologist who believed fiercely in the power of ideas to shape lives. His father, Barack Obama Sr., was a brilliant but restless student from Kenya, driven by a hunger for knowledge and a dream of returning home to transform his country. Their meeting in a Hawaiian classroom was improbable, a brief crossing of paths that would ripple outward for decades. Obama's early life unfolded across shifting landscapes. After his parents' separation, his mother remarried, and they moved to Indonesia, where he learned to adapt to the scent of durian fruit on the market air, to the call of the muezzin at dawn, to the way children learn to live with both poverty and joy. He saw chickens scratching under bamboo tables and schoolmates who had never owned a book. From those years, he absorbed a quiet lesson that the world was vast and unequal, but never without possibility. At 10, he returned to Hawaii to live with his grandparents, Madeline and Stanley Dunham. They were middle-class Americans of the old school, steady, practical, and kind. His grandmother worked at a bank. His grandfather, a veteran of World War II, liked to tell stories about the old days, the war, and the hope that had once animated the country. Honolulu became the place where Barack began to wrestle with identity, between black and white, between African and American, between belonging and distance. He read voraciously, try and make sense of himself through the pages of Baldwin, Ellison, and Du Bois. At Punahou School, a prestigious private academy, he excelled academically but often felt invisible. There were few other black students, and he felt the pull of both pride and confusion. He joined the basketball team, where the rhythm of the court gave him something pure and unspoken, a kind of language that transcended the isolation of difference. Yet under the laughter and swagger, he harbored questions about race, fairness, and what it meant to be seen. Those teenage years were marked by searching and rebellion. He experimented with marijuana, sometimes skipped class, sometimes drifted. But beneath the surface, he was gathering the fragments of an identity that would one day cohere into something purposeful. When he left Hawaii for the mainland, to Occidental College in Los Angeles, he carried only a few suitcases, a worn sense of ambition, and a hunger to understand what his place in America could be. Los Angeles was noisy, diverse, restless, a city of reinvention. Obama began to find his voice in political debates and long nights of conversation. He transferred to Columbia University in New York, drawn by its intellectual rigor and the pulse of the city. In New York, he lived in small apartments, worked odd jobs, and read Marx, Fanon, and the American Constitution with equal intensity. He wandered through Harlem, absorbing its history, feeling the weight of both progress and unfinished struggle. By the time he graduated, he was restless again, not content to chase money or comfort. He wanted, somehow, to make meaning. When he took a job as a community organizer in Chicago, he was 24 and uncertain, but hopeful. The South Side was struggling. Factories closed, jobs vanished, families fought to hold on. Obama walked those neighborhoods with his sleeves rolled up, learning to listen more than he spoke. He sat in church basements, where mothers demanded better schools. He joined meetings with factory workers, where men spoke of layoffs and lost pride. Slowly, he learned that real change was less about speeches and more about persistence, about building coalitions, earning trust, and believing in the slow work of democracy. In the midst of it all, he found faith, not a rigid one, but a belief in the dignity of people and the moral arc of justice. He began attending Trinity United Church of Christ, where Reverend Jeremiah Wright's sermons wove together gospel and social consciousness. The rhythm of that church, the swell of the choir, the cries of amen, began to settle into him, reshaping his sense of belonging. Chicago became his crucible, the place that transformed an idealistic young man into someone grounded, seasoned, and ready to lead. And it was there, among brick row houses and steel gray skies, that Barack Obama began to glimpse the path that would one day lead him to the highest office in the land in Chicago. Obama's days were long, his paycheck modest, but the work fed something deeper. He moved from one community meeting to another, mapping grievances and dreams across the South Side. He saw children coughing from factory smog, teenagers cornered by despair, grandmothers tending to families fractured by poverty and violence. Change came slowly, too slowly, but he stayed with it, learning to turn frustration into strategy. At times, he felt lost. The machinery of city politics was formidable, powered by favors, cynicism, and habit. Yet he believed that somewhere between idealism and realism lay a space where progress could breathe. The more he listened, the more he understood that leadership was not about imposing will, but about weaving people's hopes into something larger than any one person. Then came Harvard Law School. Obama's decision to study law was both pragmatic and visionary. He saw the law as a language of power, one he needed to master to bend toward justice. At Harvard, his reputation quickly grew. He was brilliant, calm, and incisive in debate, a student who could command a room without raising his voice. In 1990, he made history as the first black president of the Harvard Law Review. His time there was not without its tensions. Some thought he was too cautious. Others saw him as too radical. But Obama carried himself with the same balance that would later define his politics, measured, thoughtful, and unflappable. He graduated with honors, turning down lucrative offers from elite law firms to return to Chicago, where he felt his work was not yet done. Back in the city, he joined a small civil rights law firm and taught constitutional law at the University of Chicago. His lectures were magnetic, filled with a tension between principle and pragmatism. Students remembered how he spoke not as a preacher, but as a collaborator, challenging them to think of democracy not as a given, but as an ongoing negotiation. During those years, he met Michelle Robinson, a fellow attorney at the firm. She was strong-willed, brilliant, and grounded in a South Side sensibility that kept her immune to pretense. Their first date included a visit to the Art Institute of Chicago and a showing of Do the Right Thing. Michelle saw in him not just intellect but heart, though she made him work for her affection. They married in 1992, a union rooted in mutual respect and shared purpose. Together, they built a life defined by balance between ambition and humility, family and service. Michelle challenged him to remain present, reminding him that idealism meant little if it did not begin at home. When their daughters, Malia and Sasha, were born, Obama's world tilted toward the domestic. Bedtime stories, homework, laughter echoing through their modest house in Hyde Park. But the pull of public service was irresistible. In 1996, he ran for the Illinois State Senate. He walked door to door, often ignored, sometimes embraced, speaking to voters about health care, jobs, and education. He won, not by spectacle, but by persistence. In Springfield, he quickly became known for bridging divides. Republicans respected his fairness. Democrats admired his clarity. He passed laws expanding health care for children and reforming ethics in government, often crafting compromises that seemed impossible. Yet the larger world called. The late 1990s were years of prosperity for some, stagnation for others. Obama saw communities still locked out of opportunity and grew impatient with the limits of state politics. When he ran for Congress in 2000, he lost badly, learning humility in defeat. It stung, but he emerged wiser. He realized that politics was not about personal validation. It was about timing, message, and patience. He returned to teaching, to family, to reflection. He began writing a book, Dreams from My Father, a meditation on identity and belonging. It was both intimate and searching, a young man's attempt to reconcile his fragmented origins into coherence. The book did not make him rich or famous at first, but it was deeply honest, revealing a writer who saw the world through empathy and nuance. Then came 2004. Obama entered the race for the U.S. Senate in Illinois, again as an underdog. This time, the timing was right. His message of unity and hope resonated beyond the usual political lines. When he delivered the keynote address at the Democratic National Convention that summer, millions of Americans heard his name for the first time. There's not a liberal America and a conservative America, he declared. There's a United States of America. The word struck like lightning, clear, poetic, and unifying. Overnight, he became a national figure, a symbol of something larger, a belief that politics could once again be a moral endeavor. The months following that convention felt like a current sweeping Barack Obama into history. His Senate campaign surged ahead with new energy, powered not by the traditional machinery of politics, but by ordinary citizens, students, teachers, veterans, mothers who believed in his message. He spoke of bridging divides, of rekindling a civic faith worn thin by cynicism. In November 2004, he won by a landslide, becoming only the third African-American elected to the U.S. Senate since Reconstruction. Arriving in Washington, Obama found himself both an insider and an outsider. He was admired for his intelligence and composure, yet watched warily by those who feared his rapid rise. He took his seat in a chamber known for gridlock and ceremony, determined to learn before leading. He built relationships across the aisle, pushing for laws that made government more transparent, tightened ethics standards, and expanded support for veterans. Still, he felt the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. The Iraq War raged on. Katrina devastated New Orleans, revealing the fractures of race and class that had never fully healed. Obama spoke out, measured but firm, about the need for accountability, compassion, and renewal. He often reminded himself that idealism, untethered from reality, risked becoming indulgence. Yet realism, without hope, was surrender. His Senate years were marked by constant travel between Washington and Chicago. He would fly home on weekends, balancing committee work with the rhythms of family life. Michelle kept him grounded, often reminding him that Malia and Sasha needed a father more than the country needed another speech. He listened, even as he felt the pull of something larger stirring around him. By 2006, whispers of a presidential run began to spread. Obama dismissed them at first. He was barely 2 years into his Senate term. But the discontent of the nation was palpable. The war, economic inequality, and erosion of trust in government had left Americans hungry for something different. His book, The Audacity of Hope, published that year, became a manifesto for renewal. In its pages, he argued for pragmatic idealism, a belief that America's moral compass could still be recalibrated through empathy and common purpose. When he finally decided to run for president in 2007, he did so against the odds. The Democratic field was crowded, led by seasoned politicians like Hillary Clinton. Yet Obama's campaign was something new, grassroots, digital, youthful, and infused with a sense of mission. His message, "Yes, we can," was not mere slogan but invitation. It asked people to believe again in collective power. The campaign trail was grueling. Obama faced doubts about experience, questions about race, and relentless scrutiny. But he carried himself with calm discipline, refusing to be defined by fear or cynicism. Crowds gathered in stadiums, not just to hear policy, but to feel possibility. Volunteers built a movement that reached deep into every state, using technology and community networks to amplify hope. As the primaries unfolded, he gained momentum. Iowa was the turning point. His victory there, powered by young voters and independents, proved that his message transcended boundaries. Slowly, the impossible began to look inevitable. Yet he remained cautious, aware that history's weight could both lift and crush. Throughout the campaign, Michelle's presence was constant, both partner and anchor. She spoke candidly about their life, their struggles, their shared vision. Their daughters, though shielded from the public eye, became symbols of a new generation, one growing up in a more inclusive America. Then came the night of November 4th, 2008. The world watched as votes rolled in state by state. When CNN flashed the word Barack Obama elected president, a roar rose from crowds across the nation. In Grant Park, Chicago, beneath a cold November sky, he stood before hundreds of thousands and said simply, "If there's anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, tonight is your answer." Tears streamed down faces, young and old, black and white, rich and poor. For many, it felt like a moral reckoning, a closing of one chapter and the opening of another. But Obama knew that the symbolism of victory was only the beginning. The real test would be governance, turning hope into policy, words into endurance. As he prepared to enter the White House, he carried with him a memory of those who had marched and bled for civil rights, of the people in Chicago who taught him to listen, and of the boy from Hawaii who once searched for belonging. The journey had brought him to history's threshold, but he understood that history did not grant rest. It demanded work. The morning of January 20th, 2009, dawned cold and crystalline in Washington, D.C. The National Mall filled with faces, millions braving the winter air to witness the improbable moment when Barack Obama would place his hand on the Lincoln Bible and take the oath of office. The air hummed with anticipation, the weight of centuries pressing into that single instant. When he spoke, his voice carried over the crowd with a blend of gravity and hope. "We gather because we have chosen hope over fear, unity of purpose over conflict and discord." The country he inherited was fragile. The Great Recession had gutted the economy. Banks teetered, homes were lost, and unemployment soared. Abroad, wars dragged on in Iraq and Afghanistan. Obama's first months in office were consumed by crisis. His team, an assembly of pragmatists and reformers, moved fast to prevent collapse. They passed a massive stimulus bill aimed at saving jobs and stabilizing markets. Critics accused him of spending recklessly. Supporters saw boldness in the face of ruin. Every decision was scrutinized, every compromise dissected. He soon learned that governing was an exercise in balance, between vision and realism, persuasion and endurance. The early optimism that had electrified his campaign collided with the grinding machinery of Washington. Yet, despite the noise, Obama's calm demeanor rarely cracked. His leadership style was cerebral, deliberate, sometimes maddeningly so to allies eager for confrontation. But to him, patience was power. In foreign policy, he sought a reset. He promised to end the war in Iraq responsibly and refocus efforts on Afghanistan, where the Taliban had regained ground. He reached out to the Muslim world in a speech from Cairo, calling for a new beginning based on mutual respect. He also set his sights on a different kind of security, one rooted in diplomacy and dialogue. The world watched as he extended his hand to adversaries and championed multilateral cooperation. Domestically, his greatest ambition became healthcare reform. The Affordable Care Act was a generational effort to expand access, regulate insurance companies, and close gaps that left millions uninsured. It demanded political courage. The debates were fierce, protests erupted, and misinformation spread like wildfire. But Obama persisted, channeling his community organizers' grit. When the bill finally passed in 2010, it was both triumph and trial. The victory reshaped American healthcare, yet deepened political polarization. The midterm elections that followed were punishing. The rise of the Tea Party reflected a backlash, fueled by economic anxiety and a perception of government overreach. Republicans regained control of the House, and the mood in Washington hardened. Obama's dream of post-partisan unity seemed distant. He adapted, turning to executive actions, quiet negotiations, and the slow grind of incremental progress. Amid the turbulence, personal life remained his sanctuary. Evenings in the White House residence were filled with laughter and normalcy. Sasha and Malia doing homework, Bo the dog running across the hallways, Michelle tending the garden she started on the south lawn. The First Lady redefined her role, championing healthy living education and military families with grace and firmness. Together, they gave the nation a rare portrait of family grounded in authenticity. The crises kept coming. In 2011, a deadly tornado ravaged Joplin, Missouri. Obama walked among the wreckage, listening to survivors. "We will rebuild," he promised, not as a slogan, but as a moral duty. That same year, a secret operation in Pakistan led to the death of Osama bin Laden. The moment, though solemn, marked a turning point. In the Situation Room, Obama's face was unreadable as he gave the order. When the mission succeeded, he addressed the nation quietly, reminding Americans not of vengeance but of resilience. Yet, for every moment of unity, division returned sharper. Partisan gridlock deepened. Conspiracy theories festered. The question of race, never absent, often surfaced in coded resentment. Obama met it not with outrage, but with a steady insistence that America could do better. His faith in the nation's capacity to evolve remained unshaken, though privately, he sometimes admitted exhaustion. Despite the storms, his second term began with renewed resolve. He spoke of climate change, equality, and gun reform, issues that tested not just his politics, but his patience. He pushed for marriage equality, eventually affirming that love is love with the conviction of both lawyer and believer. Internationally, he forged the Iran nuclear deal and reestablished diplomatic ties with Cuba, acts of diplomacy rooted in long-term vision rather than immediate applause. Through it all, he stayed grounded in the same principles that had guided him from Chicago's church basements. Listen first, build coalitions, keep faith in people's capacity to rise. Some called it naivety. Others called it integrity. For Obama, it was neither. It was endurance. The belief that progress, however slow, was still progress. The years of Obama's second term unfolded with both triumph and weariness. He had aged visibly. The streaks of gray deepened, the lines on his face more. The democratic norms he had spent his career defending. He spoke sparingly, but when he did, it was with clarity. In 2018, after a series of mass shootings and racially charged attacks, he urged Americans to reject the language of fear and division, and to remember that democracy is a shared inheritance, not a weapon. At the same time, he watched the rise of a new generation inspired, in part, by his own story. Activists, organizers, scientists, and artists working to reimagine the nation's possibilities. Many of them were young, impatient, and bold. He encouraged that impatience, telling them that progress was made not by waiting for permission, but by acting with purpose. The Obama Presidential Center, planned for the south side of Chicago, was conceived as a living campus, part museum, part school for citizenship. "This is not about me," he said. "It's about us, about passing the baton." He found peace in small rituals, writing in the mornings, reading novels and biographies, playing basketball less often, but still with competitive fire. He reflected on his presidency with the detached honesty of a historian and the empathy of a man who had lived its contradictions. His memoir, A Promised Land, published in 2020, was both detailed and deeply human. It revealed the toll of leadership, the loneliness, the compromises, the weight of decision-making that could alter millions of lives. But it also conveyed a stubborn hope that the story of America, while turbulent, was still unfolding toward light. Then came the COVID-19 pandemic, and with it, a global reckoning. Obama returned to the public stage, urging science, compassion, and unity in the face of fear. He delivered virtual addresses to graduating students, telling them that crisis reveals character and that their generation would need to rebuild what had been frayed. His tone was calm, reflective, but also charged with urgency. "Do not wait for someone else to fix it," he said. "Do not wait for the perfect moment. The time is now." In 2020, as protests erupted after the killing of George Floyd, Obama's words again found resonance. He called for both outrage and organization, for protests to become policy, for empathy to become law. "We cannot rest," he wrote, "until the promise of equality is made real." His voice, though no longer from the Oval Office, still carried the moral authority of someone who had lived inside the nation's contradictions and refused to yield to cynicism. Throughout these years, the partnership between Barack and Michelle remained his anchor. They were no longer simply political figures, but cultural icons, symbols of intelligence, grace, and endurance. Together, they produced documentaries, wrote books, and amplified stories that reflected the diversity and depth of American life. Their creative work became an extension of their public service, an effort to shape the moral imagination of the next generation. Obama often joked that retirement had given him more time to be a better husband and worse golfer. Yet, beneath the humor lay gratitude. He understood that history's judgment was not his to control, only his to influence through integrity. When asked whether he missed the presidency, he smiled and said, "No, but I miss the work, the ability to make people's lives a little bit better each day." He spent time traveling again, not as a head of state, but as a teacher, visiting students in Johannesburg, innovators in Jakarta, and civic leaders in Berlin. Everywhere he went, people spoke to him not as a former president, but as a symbol of endurance, the idea that leadership rooted in empathy could still matter in a fractured age. As he moved further into post-presidency, Obama carried with him the same sense of unfinished work that had once driven him through Chicago's neighborhoods. He knew democracy was fragile, but he believed in its capacity to heal. "The story of America is not a straight line," he often said. "It's a zigzag, a struggle, a journey, but it bends toward justice when we make it bend." By the early 2020s, Barack Obama had become something rare in public life. A former president who remained both relevant and restrained, deeply respected across the world even as his own country wrestled with division. He had no interest in returning to office. His ambitions were larger than politics. What mattered to him now was legacy, not in the sense of statues or speeches, but in the quiet continuity of influence, the nurturing of a generation that might finish what he had begun. The Obama Foundation began hosting leadership summits across continents, gatherings of young dreamers and doers from every corner of the globe. Obama would walk into these rooms with the same unhurried grace that once steadied him through political storms. He listened more than he spoke, offering stories rather than instructions. "Change," he told them, "is rarely dramatic. It's the slow, stubborn work of people who refuse to quit." At home, he watched the continuing turmoil of American politics with both concern and composure. The erosion of truth, the rise of extremism, and the deepening of inequality troubled him deeply. Yet he avoided despair, believing that every era of progress had faced its own backlash. He often compared democracy to a garden. It needed tending, patience, and protection from the weeds of apathy and hate. In interviews, he spoke of civic repair as a personal calling, one that extended beyond his presidency. Our democracy, he said, is not self-sustaining. It requires citizens who see themselves not as spectators, but as participants. Michelle's becoming had become a cultural touchstone, a story of resilience, identity, and hope. The two of them often appear together at events. Their rapport effortless, their affection visible in shared laughter and gentle teasing. While Michelle became a mentor to young women around the world, Barack devoted himself to writing, mentoring, and advocacy. Their post-White House life became a new kind of service, less formal perhaps, but no less profound. Obama's reflections on leadership deepened. He began to speak more openly about the limits of charisma, the importance of institutions, and the danger of nostalgia. It's not enough to wish for a better time, he told a group of college students. You have to build it piece by piece, through policy, through empathy, through persistence. His words carried the weight of experience, spoken by a man who had lived the full arc of American hope and disillusionment, yet refused to surrender either. The media often asked if he believed America was still capable of unity. He answered with characteristic thoughtfulness, I don't think unity means agreement on everything. It means recognizing one another's humanity. T means starting from the premise that we're all in this together. Those who have followed him for decades recognize the same moral core that had defined him since his days as a community organizer, a faith not in perfection, but in people. He grew increasingly philosophical in his public writing. Essays for magazines and forewords to books became small meditations on citizenship, memory, and progress. He wrote about how nations, like individuals, carry contradictions, that love of country requires the courage to face its flaws. Patriotism, he wrote, is not about pretending we're already perfect. It's about believing we can be better. Travel became both joy and reflection. On a trip to Kenya, he visited his father's village again, older now, more at peace with the past. He spoke with local students about dreams, discipline, and humility. The world will try to tell you that power is about dominance, he said, but real power is the ability to lift others. The crowd listened in reverent silence, aware that he was not speaking from abstraction, but from a lifetime of practice. The Obama's cultural work continued to blossom. Through their production company, Higher Ground, they helped bring to life films and documentaries about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Barack believed stories could bridge divides in ways that speeches could not. We are all narrative creatures, he often said. If we can see ourselves in someone else's story, we're less likely to fear them. Even as he embraced this softer form of influence, he remained unafraid to challenge complacency. When democratic institutions were tested around the world, he spoke out calmly but firmly about the need for truth, transparency, and empathy. He warned against cynicism, calling it a refuge for the comfortable and a poison for the hopeful. His speeches carried no illusions, yet they radiated steadiness, the kind that could outlast outrage. At home, he was content to play the long game. He invested in young civic leaders, supported grassroots movements, and mentored emerging politicians. Some of them would later say that his advice was deceptively simple. Listen more, stay humble, remember why you started. In his presence, people sensed both gravity and lightness, the combination of someone who had seen the highest office and learned that greatness was not about power, but perspective. And through it all, he remained a husband and father first. He and Michelle celebrated milestones quietly, anniversaries, graduations, new chapters. Watching their daughters grow into adulthood brought him a deeper peace than any public accolade. My proudest title, he once said smiling, is still Dad. In private moments, Obama sometimes walked along Potomac at dusk, the city lights flickering against the water. Those who saw him from afar describe a man at ease with his place in history, still curious, still alert, still believing. The work was unfinished, yes, but that had always been the point. America, he once said, is a promise you must keep remaking as the decade turned. Barack Obama's story became less about what he'd done and more about what he continued to inspire. He stood at the intersection of memory and motion, a figure both historical and alive, symbol and mentor, voice and listener. He had entered public life through a door opened by struggle, and he never stopped holding it open for others. The Obama Presidential Center began to rise on Chicago's South Side, a sweeping complex of glass, stone, and greenery that looked less like a monument and more like an invitation. Obama envisioned it not as a shrine to the past, but as a workshop for the future. This will be a place where the next generation learns to take up the work, he said at the groundbreaking, his hand brushing the soil of the city that had shaped him, because the best way to honor our story is to keep writing it. He continued to move through the world with that calm cadence that had always defined him, measured, thoughtful, deliberate. He met young organizers in Nairobi, climate scientists in Copenhagen, and teachers in Detroit. Wherever he went, he asked questions first, teaching through curiosity. The theme of his later years was continuity, how to transform power into mentorship, fame into purpose. It's not enough to have made history, he told an audience in Singapore. You have to make history matter. At home, his life took on a quieter rhythm. Mornings began with black coffee and reading. Afternoons with meetings or walks. Evenings with Michelle, laughter, and jazz humming through the house. He was no longer chasing time. He was shaping it. His reflections grew deeper, his tone more intimate. When he spoke publicly, it was not to command attention, but to steady it. In moments of national crisis, people still turned to him, not for policy, but for perspective. His words, patient and unhurried, reminded them that storms always pass, and that the measure of a nation is not how it celebrates victory, but how it recovers from loss. He wrote essays about democracy's fragility and faith's resilience. He published another volume of memoirs, this one less political and more human, about aging, humility, and hope. I used to think leadership was about getting people to follow you, he wrote. Now I think it's about helping people find a leader in themselves. The book resonated deeply, becoming less a document of his life, and more a mirror for others to examine their own. As the years moved forward, the Obama's influence became cultural as much as political. Through Higher Ground, they produced films and stories that amplified quiet heroism, workers, teachers, artists, immigrants, caretakers. Obama believed these stories stitched together the moral fabric of the country, reminding people that history is not only made in marble halls, but in living rooms and classrooms and factory floors. When he visited schools, children still reached out to touch him, wide-eyed with wonder. He would kneel, meet their gaze, and say, "You belong here. You always have." He never spoke to them as if they were future citizens. He spoke as if they already were. That simple shift in tone, affirmation over aspiration, became the essence of his message. He and Michelle continued to travel occasionally, but their center of gravity remained Chicago. There, among the neighborhoods where he once walked as an organizer, he could see the arc of his own life mirrored in the city's evolution. The streets had changed, but the spirit had not. The same resilience, the same stubborn hope. Sometimes he would visit his old haunts quietly, shaking hands, laughing, asking about families. "Feels like coming home," he would say. In later interviews, he spoke less of politics and more of gratitude. "I've lived a life I couldn't have imagined," he told one journalist. "And the best part isn't the offices I held. It's the people I met, the stories I carry." He often returned to one recurring belief, that empathy is not weakness but strength, and that nations, like individuals, are measured by their capacity to imagine one another's pain. As the world faced new challenges, climate upheaval, displacement, technological disruption, Obama's legacy matured into a kind of moral compass. He was not the loudest voice in the room, but his presence reminded others that decency was still possible. In an era of noise, his silence sometimes spoke louder. One evening, years after leaving office, he returned to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial to address a gathering of young leaders. The sun was setting, the sky flushed with gold. "You are the next authors of this story," he said. "You will write it with your choices, your courage, your kindness. Don't wait for someone else to fix it. Don't wait for perfect conditions. The work of building a better world is never finished, and that's what makes it beautiful." As the crowd applauded, he paused, looking out across the reflecting pool toward the Washington Monument, where the lights were just beginning to shimmer. For a moment, the past and the future seemed to meet there, in the still water, in the murmurs of the young, in the long breath of a nation still learning itself. Then he smiled, the same calm, knowing smile he had carried from Honolulu's beaches to the corridors of power. The smile of a man who believed, not in destiny, but in effort, not in perfection, but in progress. And with that quiet confidence, Barack Obama turned once more toward the long, unfinished horizon of the American dream. And so, the story of Barack Obama does not close with a final chapter, but with an open page, because his journey, like the nation's, was never about endings. It was about the constant act of becoming, a reminder that progress is not inherited. It is earned anew by each generation that dares believe in something larger than itself. From the boy who questioned his place in the world to the man who stood before millions and spoke of unity, Obama's life teaches that hope is not naive. It is disciplined, deliberate, and enduring. His story is not only about politics or power, but about empathy, resilience, and the simple conviction that our differences need not divide us. In the end, his greatest legacy is not the laws he passed or the history he made, but the belief he left behind that ordinary people, working together, can still bend the arc of the world toward justice. And as we carry that lesson forward, we remember his quiet challenge to us all. The work is not finished. It never is. But that is what makes it worth doing.